My sister is trying to steal my apartment by claiming I don't deserve it, because I'm single. Hi everyone! Today's story will blow your mind, but really quick, if you enjoy this content, hit that subscribe button. Channel's been a bit quiet lately, and your support keeps it all going. Let's jump in. Original post, 6 months ago. I, 29M, need some perspective here because I feel like I'm going crazy. My family is pressuring me to give up my one-bedroom apartment to my sister Jessica, 27F, and her husband Mark, 30M, because they have 2 kids and I'm single. Here's the background. 3 years ago, I worked my ass off to save for a down payment on this apartment. I'm talking about eating ramen for months, picking up extra shifts at my job as a software developer, and living like a monk to make it happen. When I finally bought this place, it was the proudest moment of my life. It's nothing fancy, a modest one-bedroom in a decent neighborhood, but it's mine. My sister Jessica married Mark 2 years ago, and they have twin boys who are now 4 years old. They currently live in a 2-bedroom rental about 20 minutes away from me. According to them, their place is too small, and they need more space. Fair enough, raising twins can't be easy. The problem started 2 months ago during Sunday dinner at my parents' house. Jessica casually mentioned how cramped their apartment feels and how nice it would be to have more space. Then she looked directly at me and said, "It's really unfair that James has a whole apartment to himself while we're struggling with the boys in such a tight space." My mother, Patricia, immediately jumped on this. "Jessica's right, honey. You don't really need all that space. It would be so much better for the children to have room to play." I tried to explain that I love my apartment, that I worked hard for it, and that it's my home. My father, Robert, cut me off. "Don't be selfish, son. Family comes first. Those boys need space to grow." What really got to me was Jessica's next comment. "Single people don't understand what it's like to raise a family. You just use your apartment to bring different women over anyway." That stung because I've been single for about 8 months after a long-term relationship ended. The conversation escalated quickly. Jessica started crying, saying how hard it is to raise twins in such a small space. Mark jumped in, talking about how they can't afford a bigger place right now because of childcare costs. My parents painted me as the villain for hoarding space I don't need. I stood my ground and said no. The dinner ended with Jessica storming out, my parents disappointed in me, and Mark giving me dirty looks. Since then, the pressure hasn't stopped. My parents call me almost daily. "Just think about it, James. It's temporary until they can afford something bigger." Jessica sends me articles about the importance of family support and how single adults should help relatives with children. Mark has started making comments about how some people are just naturally selfish. The worst part? They've started involving extended family. My Aunt Susan called last week asking why I can't do the right thing for my nephews. My cousin Brian posted something on Facebook about family loyalty that was clearly directed at me. I'm starting to doubt myself. Am I being selfish? Should family obligations override personal property rights? The constant guilt trips are wearing me down, and I'm beginning to feel isolated from everyone I care about. Jessica keeps saying it would only be temporary, but she and Mark have made no concrete plans for finding their own place. When I ask for a timeline, I get vague answers like, once we save enough, or when the market improves. The pressure is affecting my work and my mental health. I love my family, but I also love my home. I worked incredibly hard for this apartment, and it represents my independence and success. Giving it up feels like giving up a piece of myself. What would you do in my situation? Am I wrong for prioritizing my own needs over my sister's family's needs? Update 1 to 4 months ago. Holy shit, Reddit. You guys were right about everything. The situation has escalated beyond what I ever imagined, and I'm honestly shaken by how far my family was willing to go. First, thank you for all the support on my original post. Reading your comments helped me realize I wasn't crazy for wanting to keep my apartment that I worked for and legally own. Your advice about setting boundaries and documenting everything probably saved my ass. So here's what happened. After my original post, I decided to stand firm. I had a family meeting where I clearly stated that I would not be giving up my apartment, period. I explained that I understood their space concerns, but that my property wasn't the solution to their problems. Jessica's reaction was explosive. She started screaming about how I was ruining her children's lives and that I was a selfish asshole who would die alone. Mark called me pathetic and said real men prioritize family over material possessions. My parents tried to play mediator but kept pushing the "it's just temporary" angle. I thought that would be the end of it. I was wrong. 2 weeks after that meeting, I came home from work to find Jessica, Mark, and some woman I didn't recognize standing in my living room. Apparently, Jessica had gotten my spare key from my parents, who I'd given it to for emergencies, and was giving this woman a tour of my apartment. The woman turned out to be a potential renter. Jessica was showing her around, talking about move-in dates and discussing rent prices. When she saw me, Jessica had the audacity to act like this was normal. "Oh hey James. This is Linda. She's interested in subletting your place for a few months while you find somewhere smaller." I was speechless. I told Linda there was a mistake, that this wasn't Jessica's apartment to rent, and asked her to leave. Poor Linda looked mortified and left quickly. Then I turned to Jessica and Mark. "What the fuck is wrong with you? This is my apartment. You have no right to be here, let alone show it to strangers." Jessica's response floored me. "Mom and Dad said you'd come around. We're just trying to speed up the process." Linda was willing to pay good money, and we could all benefit. Mark added, "You're being dramatic. It's just temporary, and everyone wins." I demanded my key back immediately. Jessica claimed she didn't have it with her. I changed my locks that same day and installed a security camera system. Best $300 I ever spent. But it didn't stop there. Over the next month, I discovered Jessica had been telling people in the neighborhood that she was my apartment manager, posting ads online listing my apartment as available for rent, collecting application fees from potential tenants, at least $500 from what I could track down, telling the building management that she was authorized to make decisions about my lease. The building manager, thankfully, knew me well and called to confirm before making any changes. That's how I found out Jessica had tried to add herself as an authorized occupant on my lease. I documented everything. Screenshots of the rental ads, records of the application fees, emails Jessica sent to prospective tenants. I also got statements from Linda and 2 other people who had viewed my apartment with Jessica. When I confronted my parents about giving Jessica my key, they got defensive. My father said, "We thought you'd appreciate the help finding a solution." My mother added, "Jessica's just trying to make the best of a difficult situation." I told them that what Jessica did was potentially illegal and definitely unethical. I said I was considering involving the police. That got their attention real quick. My parents begged me not to press charges, saying it would tear the family apart. Jessica, when confronted with all the evidence, broke down crying and claimed she was just desperate and thought I'd eventually thank her for taking initiative. I made it clear that any further attempts to access my apartment or interfere with my property would result in immediate police involvement. I also demanded Jessica return all the application fees she'd collected. She initially refused but eventually paid back the money when I threatened to file a complaint with local authorities. The family dynamics have been tense ever since. My parents are walking on eggshells, Jessica barely speaks to me, and Mark openly glares at me during family gatherings. Extended family members have taken sides, with most supporting me once they learned the full story. But here's the thing, I feel lighter than I have in months. Standing up for myself and setting clear boundaries has been empowering. My apartment is secure, my stress levels have decreased, and I've realized that enabling toxic behavior doesn't help anyone. Jessica and Mark still haven't made any concrete moves toward finding a larger place. They're still in the same 2-bedroom rental, still complaining about space, still expecting other people to solve their problems. Some relatives have suggested I should let this go, for the sake of family harmony, but I'm done prioritizing everyone else's comfort over my own well-being and property rights. Thanks again, Reddit. Your support gave me the courage to stand up for myself when I needed it most. Update 2 months ago. Jesus Christ, Reddit. I thought the apartment tours were bad. What happened 2 weeks ago has me seriously considering going no contact with my entire family. After my last update, things had been relatively quiet. Jessica wasn't speaking to me, which was honestly a relief. My parents would make occasional comments about family forgiveness, but weren't actively pressuring me anymore. I thought maybe they'd finally accepted that my apartment wasn't up for grabs. I was wrong. Again. 2 weeks ago, I came home from a weekend camping trip with some friends. I'd been gone since Friday evening and got back Sunday afternoon around 3 p.m. As I walked up to my building, I noticed a locksmith van parked outside. Weird, but not unusual. People lock themselves out all the time. I went to unlock my apartment door and my key wouldn't work. At all. The lock had been changed. I stood there for a moment, thinking I was going crazy. Then I heard voices from inside my apartment. I knocked, and you'll never guess who answered. Jessica. She opened the door like she owned the place, looked at me with fake surprise and said, "Oh, James. What are you doing here?" What was I doing there? At my own apartment? Behind her, I could see Mark unpacking boxes in my living room. The twins were running around, and there were toys scattered everywhere. My furniture had been moved around, and there were unfamiliar items on my kitchen counter. "What the fuck is going on here?" I demanded. Jessica's response was infuriating. Mom and Dad called the locksmith. They told him I was the new authorized tenant and that you'd moved out but forgotten to turn over the keys. They said you were having some mental health issues and might try to break in. My parents had told the locksmith that I was mentally unstable to justify changing the locks on my own apartment. Mark appeared behind Jessica. "Look, man, this doesn't have to be complicated. We left your stuff packed up in the bedroom. You can come get it whenever." They had packed my belongings in my own apartment, like I was being evicted. I immediately called the police. Jessica tried to stop me, saying we could work this out as a family, but I was done. When the officers arrived, I showed them my lease, my ID, and proof of ownership. I explained the situation while Jessica and Mark tried to claim there was a family agreement. The locksmith was still there, thankfully. When the police questioned him, he admitted that my parents had called claiming to be the landlords and said their son had moved out but was refusing to return the keys due to mental health issues. He'd asked for documentation, but my father had been convincing and offered to pay extra for the emergency service. The officers were not amused. They told Jessica and Mark they had 20 minutes to gather their belongings and leave, or they'd be arrested for trespassing and potentially breaking and entering. Jessica completely lost it. She started screaming that this was discrimination against families with children, that I was trying to make her kids homeless, that the police should be ashamed of themselves for supporting a selfish bachelor over innocent children. One of the officers calmly explained that regardless of family relationships, you can't just take over someone else's legal residence. Mark tried to argue that there had been a misunderstanding, and they'd been told they could move in. The twins were crying by this point, which made everything worse. Jessica used their tears as ammunition, telling the officers, "Look what you're doing to these innocent babies. Their uncle is making them homeless." I felt terrible for the kids. None of this was their fault. But I also wasn't going to let emotional manipulation change the facts. It took 2 hours to get them out. Jessica and Mark had brought a lot of stuff. While they packed, Jessica alternated between crying, screaming at me, and trying to negotiate. "What if we just stay tonight and figure this out tomorrow? The kids are tired. Surely you can't kick out children? This is all a misunderstanding. Mom and Dad said it was okay." The whole time, Mark was muttering about lawyers and family court and how this wasn't over. They finally left, but not before Jessica made one last desperate attempt. She grabbed my arm and said, "James, please. We gave up our lease. We have nowhere to go. You can't do this to your own nephews." That stopped me cold. "You gave up your lease? When?" Turns out, they'd terminated their rental agreement 2 weeks earlier, expecting to move into my apartment permanently. They weren't just camping out temporarily, they had actually made my apartment their plan A with no backup. The police officers looked as stunned as I felt. One of them asked Jessica, "Ma'am, are you telling us you made yourselves homeless based on an assumption?" After they left, I called my parents immediately. The conversation was explosive. "How could you do this to me?" I demanded. "You told a locksmith I was mentally unstable. You helped them break into my apartment." My mother was crying. "We thought you'd come around once you saw how happy the boys were there. Jessica said you'd agreed to think about it." My father was defensive. "Those children need stability. You're being unreasonable, and we had to take action for their sake." I told them that what they'd done was illegal and that I could press charges against all of them. The silence that followed was deafening. Then my father said something that made my blood boil. "If you call the police on your own family, you're no son of mine." I hung up. Later that evening, Jessica called me crying. They were staying in a hotel, which they couldn't afford for more than a few days. She begged me to let them stay, just until we figure something out. I said no. She asked if I could at least pay for the hotel since this was partially my fault for not being clearer about my boundaries. I said no again. She then asked if I could loan them money for a security deposit on a new place. No. The next day, my Aunt Susan called. Apparently, the whole extended family had heard Jessica's version of events, where I'd tricked them into giving up their lease and then called the police on innocent children. I spent an hour explaining what actually happened. Aunt Susan was shocked, especially about my parents lying to the locksmith and helping orchestrate the break-in. Some family members have reached out to apologize after hearing the truth. Others are still Team Jessica, believing that families should stick together no matter what. Jessica and Mark found a new rental, but it's smaller and more expensive than their previous place. They're struggling financially and have made it clear they blame me for their situation. My parents haven't apologized. In fact, my father doubled down, saying I chose property over family, and that I'll regret it when I'm old and alone. The whole experience has been eye-opening. I always knew my family had boundary issues, but I never imagined they'd literally break into my apartment and change my locks. I've installed additional security measures and am considering going no contact with my parents. The trust is completely broken. Thanks for all the support, Reddit. This community has kept me sane through this insanity. Update 3 to 1 month ago. I can't believe I'm back with another update, but this situation just keeps getting worse. My family's behavior has escalated to a level I never thought possible, and I'm honestly starting to fear for my safety. After the lock-changing incident, I thought maybe we'd hit rock bottom. I was wrong. Last month brought a series of events that have left me questioning everything I thought I knew about my family. It started with financial retaliation. My parents, who had been helping Jessica and Mark with various expenses over the years, suddenly cut them off completely. But instead of seeing this as consequences for their actions, they blamed me. According to family gossip, courtesy of my cousin Brian, who's been keeping me informed, my parents told Jessica that they couldn't afford to help anymore because they were so stressed about the family conflict I'd caused. This was bullshit, and I knew it. My parents are comfortable financially, not wealthy, but stable. They were using money as a weapon to pressure me into caving. Then came the social media campaign. Jessica started posting vague but pointed messages on Facebook about family members who choose money over blood, and what happens when success makes people forget where they came from. She shared articles about the housing crisis and how families need to stick together during hard times. The posts gained traction among relatives and family friends who didn't know the full story. I started getting messages from distant cousins and family friends asking why I was being so hard on Jessica during her time of need. But the real escalation came 3 weeks ago. I was working from home when my building security called. There was a woman downstairs claiming I was her brother and demanding to be let up because she had a family emergency. It was Jessica. Again. I told security not to let her up and that there was no emergency. 20 minutes later, she was somehow in my building, knocking on my apartment door. James, please, we need to talk. This has gone too far. I didn't open the door. I asked how she got into the building. Someone let me in when they were coming out. Look, I'm not here to fight. I'm here to make a deal. Through the door, she explained her deal. She and Mark would move into my apartment for 6 months while they saved money for a house down payment. In exchange, they'd pay me rent, not market rate, but something. After 6 months, they'd move out, and our relationship could go back to normal. When I said no, she started crying. James, please. The kids are asking why Uncle James doesn't love them anymore. Do you want to be the reason your nephews grow up thinking family doesn't matter? The emotional manipulation was exhausting. I told her that her housing situation wasn't my responsibility and that she needed to leave. That's when she played her trump card. What if I told you that Dad's been talking about changing his will? This got my attention. I opened the door but kept the chain on. Jessica looked terrible, exhausted, stressed, desperate. He's really upset about all this. He thinks you've changed, that you're not the son he raised. He's been saying that people who don't support family don't deserve family support. I asked what she wanted me to do with this information. Just let us stay for a few months. Show him that you're still the good person he raised. Fix this before it's too late. I closed the door. The threat was clear: comply or face financial consequences through inheritance changes. But Jessica wasn't done. She started coming by regularly, sometimes with the twins. She'd bring them to the building playground across the street and make sure I could see them from my window. The boys would wave at my building, and she'd point up at my apartment. The manipulation was transparent but effective. Seeing my nephews, who I genuinely love, being used as emotional weapons was heartbreaking. 2 weeks ago, things got scary. I woke up at 2 a.m. to someone trying to open my apartment door. I could hear the lock being manipulated and quiet voices in the hallway. I called building security immediately while grabbing the baseball bat I'd started keeping by my bed. Security found Jessica and Mark in the hallway with what looked like lockpicking tools. Their excuse? They were checking on me because I hadn't been answering my phone and they were worried about my mental health. At 2 a.m. With lockpicks. Building security called the police. When officers arrived, Jessica and Mark claimed they were just concerned family members who were worried I might hurt myself. They said I'd been acting erratically and they were afraid I was having a breakdown. The manipulation was sophisticated. They presented themselves as caring relatives dealing with a troubled family member, while I looked like the paranoid guy with a baseball bat. Fortunately, The security footage told a different story. The cameras clearly showed them attempting to break into my apartment, not just knocking out of concern. The police issued a formal trespassing warning. Jessica and Mark were banned from my building and told that any future contact would result in arrest. But the damage to my reputation was done. Building management called me in for a meeting the next day. While they were supportive, they expressed concern about the ongoing family drama affecting building security and other residents. I had to provide a detailed explanation of the situation and assure them that I was taking steps to resolve it. They were understanding but made it clear that any future incidents could affect my lease. The stress was overwhelming. I wasn't sleeping well, I was constantly looking over my shoulder, and I was making mistakes at work because I couldn't concentrate. That's when I made a decision that surprised even me. I hired a lawyer. Not to sue my family, but to send a formal cease and desist letter and to understand my legal options. The lawyer, Jennifer Walsh, specialized in family harassment cases and restraining orders. After hearing my story and reviewing my documentation, she was shocked by the escalation pattern. She said that what started as family pressure had evolved into stalking and harassment behavior that could become dangerous. The cease and desist letter was delivered to Jessica, Mark, and my parents last week. It formally documented the pattern of harassment, the break-in attempts, and the ongoing manipulation. It warned that any further contact or attempts to access my property would result in legal action. The response was immediate and explosive. My father called me, angrier than I'd ever heard him. "How dare you threaten your own family with lawyers? What kind of person have you become?" I tried to explain that I'd been forced to take legal action because the situation had gotten out of control. He cut me off. "You've chosen your path, James. Don't expect us to be there when you finally realize what you've lost." My mother called later, crying. She begged me to drop the legal threats and give Jessica one more chance. When I refused, she said something that chilled me. "Your sister is desperate, James. Desperate people do desperate things. Please don't push her to that point." Was that a threat? A warning? I honestly don't know. I've decided to take Jennifer's advice and document everything while considering a restraining order. The situation has moved beyond family conflict into potential legal territory. Some relatives have reached out with support after learning about the attempted break-in. Others have cut contact entirely, viewing my legal action as a betrayal of family loyalty. I'm emotionally exhausted but also oddly relieved. Having professional support and legal backing has made me feel less alone in this situation. The twins started school this week. Jessica posted pictures of them in their new classroom, along with a caption about starting fresh despite obstacles created by people who should support us. Even their children's milestones have become opportunities for manipulation. I love my family, but I'm starting to accept that love doesn't require accepting abuse. Setting boundaries isn't selfish, it's necessary for my mental health and safety. Thanks again for all the support, Reddit. Your comments have been a lifeline during this insanity. Final update, present day. Reddit, I'm writing this final update for my apartment, which I still own and live in, despite everything my family put me through. It's been a month since my last update, and I wanted to share how this all finally resolved, because the ending surprised even me. The cease and desist letter worked better than I expected, but not in the way I thought it would. 2 weeks after the letter was delivered, I got a call from my cousin Brian. He'd been my main source of family intel throughout this whole mess, and he had some shocking news. Apparently, the legal letter had scared my parents enough that they'd started asking questions about Jessica and Mark's financial situation. What they discovered changed everything. Remember how Jessica and Mark claimed they couldn't afford a bigger place because of childcare costs and other expenses? Turns out, that wasn't the whole truth. Brian had been doing some digging after his own interactions with them became weird and pushy. Mark had been gambling. Not just casual betting, serious gambling with significant losses. Over the past year, he'd blown through their savings, maxed out credit cards, and even borrowed money from friends and extended family members under false pretenses. The reason they couldn't afford a bigger apartment wasn't because of normal family expenses. It was because Mark had gambled away their housing fund, their emergency savings, and even money that was supposed to go toward the twins' childcare. Jessica knew about some of it but had been hiding the full extent from everyone, including my parents. She'd been desperately trying to find ways to reduce their expenses, which is why my free apartment had become so appealing. But here's the kicker: when my parents started asking detailed questions about their finances, prompted by concerns about the legal situation, the whole house of cards came tumbling down. Mark had forged Jessica's signature on loan applications. He'd been intercepting mail to hide collection notices. He'd even taken out a second mortgage on a property they didn't own by using falsified documents. The gambling debt was somewhere around $85,000, and there were potential criminal charges for the fraudulent loan applications. When my parents learned the truth, they were devastated. Not just about the money, but about how they'd been manipulated into pressuring me to give up my apartment as part of Jessica's desperate attempt to reduce expenses. My father called me 3 days after Brian filled me in. For the first time in months, he sounded like the dad I remembered from my childhood. "James, I owe you an apology. A big one. I was completely wrong about this situation. I'm sorry we put you through this." He explained what they'd learned about Mark's gambling and financial fraud. He also admitted that Jessica had been feeding them a narrative designed to make me look selfish while hiding her real motivations. "She kept saying you'd changed, that success had made you greedy and uncaring. We thought we were helping her stand up to a family member who'd forgotten his roots. We never imagined." My mother got on the phone, crying. She apologized for lying to the locksmith, for enabling the break-ins, for choosing to believe Jessica's version of events without questioning it. It was surreal. 4 months, I'd been painted as the villain in this family drama. Now, suddenly, everyone understood that I'd been the victim of an elaborate manipulation campaign. But the story gets crazier. 2 days after my parents' apology call, Jessica showed up at my building again. This time, she wasn't trying to break in or manipulate her way upstairs. She was sitting on the front steps, crying. Building security called me, and I went down to talk to her. She looked terrible, like she hadn't slept in days. "James, I'm sorry. I'm so sorry. You were right about everything." She'd filed for divorce. She'd also filed a police report against Mark for financial fraud and forgery. The gambling debts weren't legally her responsibility since she hadn't signed the loan documents, but her credit was ruined, and she was facing potential eviction. "I know I don't deserve forgiveness. I know I manipulated everyone, including Mom and Dad. I was just so scared and desperate, and Mark kept promising he could fix it if we could just reduce our expenses enough." She wasn't asking to move into my apartment. She wasn't asking for money. She was just apologizing. Genuinely apologizing. "I used the twins as weapons against you. I turned our parents against you. I tried to steal your home. I don't know how to make any of that right." It was the first real, honest conversation we'd had in years. I didn't forgive her on the spot. The damage was too extensive for that. But I told her I appreciated the apology and that I hoped she and the boys would be okay. She's moved in with our Aunt Susan temporarily while sorting out the divorce and financial mess. The twins are struggling with the changes, but they're getting counseling and seem to be adapting. Mark, meanwhile, is facing serious legal consequences. Turns out, the fraudulent loan applications weren't his first brush with financial crimes. He's currently out on bail and looking at potential jail time. My parents have been trying to rebuild our relationship. It's awkward and slow, but we're making progress. They've acknowledged that their behavior was unacceptable and that they allowed themselves to be manipulated because they wanted to believe they were helping. My father admitted something that really stuck with me. "I was so focused on being a good grandfather that I forgot how to be a good father." "I'm sorry, son." They've offered to pay for the security upgrades I made to my apartment and to compensate me for the legal fees. I haven't decided whether to accept, but the gesture means something. The extended family dynamics have been interesting to watch. Relatives who had sided with Jessica based on her version of events have been apologizing. Others who supported me throughout have been vindicated but aren't gloating. Family gatherings are still awkward, but they're happening again. Jessica doesn't attend. She's focusing on rebuilding her life and dealing with the divorce, but the rest of us are slowly finding our way back to normal. A few weeks ago, my nephews visited me for the first time since this whole mess started. They were shy at first, but we had a good time playing video games and eating pizza. They asked why Daddy doesn't live with them anymore, and I helped Jessica explain it in age-appropriate terms. The boys don't blame me for their family's troubles, which was a huge relief. Kids are more resilient and perceptive than adults sometimes give them credit for. I've learned a lot about myself through this experience. I learned that I can stand up for myself even when everyone I care about is against me. I learned that setting boundaries isn't selfish, it's necessary. I learned that sometimes the people who claim to love you the most are the ones most willing to sacrifice your well-being for their convenience. I also learned that manipulation can be incredibly sophisticated and that good people can be convinced to do terrible things when they're fed the right narrative. My apartment is still mine. I've made some improvements with the money I would have spent on therapy, though I did do some therapy too. I've got better security, new furniture, and a renewed appreciation for my space. I'm dating someone new. Her name is Amanda, and she's amazing. She knows the whole story and has been incredibly supportive. It's nice to have someone in my corner who isn't related to me and doesn't have complicated family loyalties. The relationship with my parents is improving slowly. We have coffee once a week and are rebuilding trust gradually. They've learned not to make assumptions about family conflicts and to ask questions before taking sides. Jessica is doing better. The divorce is proceeding, she's getting financial counseling, and she's in therapy to deal with the trauma of Mark's deception and her own behavior during this crisis. We exchange texts occasionally, mostly about the twins, but we're not close yet. Maybe we will be someday. Mark is out of our lives completely. Good riddance. The whole experience taught me that family relationships, like any relationships, require mutual respect and healthy boundaries. Love alone isn't enough if it's not accompanied by consideration and basic decency. I'm grateful for everyone who supported me through this, especially this Reddit community. Your comments and advice helped me stay sane when I thought I was losing my mind. For anyone dealing with similar family pressure or manipulation, trust your instincts, document everything, and don't be afraid to set hard boundaries. The people who truly love you will respect those boundaries, even if it takes them time to understand. And sometimes, the best thing you can do for family is refuse to enable their worst impulses. My apartment is still mine, my relationships are healthier, and I'm sleeping through the night again. That's what victory looks like in a situation like this. Thanks, Reddit. You helped save my sanity and probably my apartment too. TLDR, sister tried to steal my apartment by claiming single people don't deserve space. Family pressure escalated to break-ins and lock changes. Turns out sister's husband had gambling addiction and massive debt, which was the real reason they needed my place. Legal threats exposed the truth, family apologized, sister divorced gambling addict, everyone's in therapy, and I still have my apartment.